The Minnesota Vikings are the best team to never win the Super Bowl, and it isn't even close. I'm Cole Smith, and on today's episode of Vikings Latest, I'm going to explain to you how the Vikings have consistently let generations of Minnesota Vikings fans down and how they've done it in epic proportions despite having great talent throughout their entire franchise history and having great teams throughout their franchise history. But first, before we get into that, make sure to subscribe to the channel, stay up to date with 5 days a week of Vikings news here on Vikings Latest throughout the offseason and into training camp, which begins this time next month, actually. So let's jump right into it. Vikings are the best team to never win the Super Bowl. You may have seen on Vikings Twitter that there is a post going around of highest winning percentage of the Super Bowl era, and the Vikings were fourth on that list. And that list had 13 teams on it, and every other team on that list has at least two Super Bowl victories. Minnesota Vikings don't have any. I don't know if you've ever heard. Vikings have never won it all, but they have had an impressive history of actually, just winning when it doesn't really matter. So other 12 teams on the graphic have at least two Super Bowl wins, which just kind of digs a knife in a little bit deeper. Just kind of brings that pain back. The Vikings have, had a lot of teams that have done really well. 1998, you probably remember that one. That was like the very early stages of my fandom. I was 6 years old during the 98 NFC Championship game. The 2009 team, that's the one that stings the most for me when the Vikings lost to the Saints. When the Saints cheated and beat the crap out of Brett Favre, and then Favre threw the game and well, not game-ending interception, but he threw the interception when the Vikings could have been in position to kick a game-winning field goal. 2017 against the Philadelphia Eagles in 38-7 right after the Minneapolis Miracle. If you're an older fan, maybe you remember the 1987 team that lost to Washington when Darren Nelson dropped a ball on the goal line. And then maybe even back to 1975 with the Drew Pearson push-off in the divisional round in the original Hail Mary. It goes beyond just the Vikings have really sucked, for a long time, and they've kind of made a run here or there. Usually, that's not really the case. The Vikings have consistently been pretty good, and it's not even just that graphic. If you start digging deeper, it actually starts to sting even worse because it's not even just like the other good teams that really kind of bury the knife in your back. It's almost these other teams that aren't very good, and they've even had some random success, which hurts as well. So, beyond just the graphic, that graphic just shows the Super Bowl era, which is since the 1966 season. So that actually gets rid of like the first 5 years of the Vikings' existence. Vikings were created. First season was in 1961, and they just had growing pains. Every team kind of has growing pains. Most franchises have some growing pains in their early stages, and so you get rid of that. That's why the Vikings have the fourth highest winning percentage. Even with those first couple seasons, though, Vikings still have a 550 all-time winning percentage. It's tied for sixth all-time with the Chiefs and the Dolphins. We know what success the Chiefs have had recently. The Dolphins, they've won a couple Super Bowls. Their last one was against the Vikings after the 1973 season, and then they've been back to the Super Bowl back in the 80s a couple times. They made it with Dan Marino in his second year. But even that kind of explains why the Vikings are such outliers, because since the 80s, Dolphins haven't really had much success. They haven't won a playoff game since 2000, which is bonkers. They're still trying to replace Dan Marino. And the Vikings have made it to what, three NFC Championship games in that time. Uh, so it's puzzling when you start looking digging deeper into it. Vikings have 32 playoff appearances, which is tied for sixth all time. So they're making the playoffs. It's just crazy. So when you look at their 550 win percentage, tied for sixth all time, every franchise with a better winning percentage all time has won a Super Bowl, which isn't totally surprising. It kind of goes with that first graphic we were talking about. But if you look at the other other teams in the top 16 of all-time winning percentage, all those teams besides the Vikings have won a Super Bowl. So like the teams below the Vikings have won Super Bowls, which is very frustrating. The next team, the next highest winning percentage is the Browns, who are 17th overall with a 503 winning percentage. They're the next highest franchise to not win a Super Bowl. And a lot of that is getting weight carried from like the 80s and then like the pre Super Bowl era teams with Otto Graham, Paul Brown, when they were really, really good. But they haven't had as much success during the Super Bowl era. So stuff like that like really stings as well. That like all these other teams are able to find success, but then it's like it's really painful when you start like looking like down the list. Nobody in the like out of all the teams in the NFL, nobody has a worse all-time winning percentage than the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who have a 412 winning percentage. Like they didn't win a single game their inaugural season. They didn't make the playoffs between 2008 and 2019. Yet they still have two Super Bowl titles. Like explain that they became a franchise the same year that the Vikings last made a Super Bowl, and they sucked. They were called the Yucks, and they were awful. And they have somehow figured it out. They've had like some fleeting moments of brilliance outside of like mostly just sucking their entire franchise. They've still lucked into a couple Super. I don't want to say lucked into because they were really good in 2002. They're good in 2020, but it's just crazy that they were able to navigate like all these really bad seasons and they're still able to just figure it out because over the course of time, like law of averages, right? It's going to work out at some point. Vikings, they haven't made the Super Bowl since 1976. The only team in the NFC who hasn't made it in that time is the Lions. The Lions have never made it to the Super Bowl. Every other team in the NFC has made it to the Super Bowl since the 1991 season, and the Vikings just still can't get over the hump. It is crazy to me that the Vikings are just able to do this. Now, what's crazy about it is that the Vikings were actually they've lost all four Super Bowls that they've been in, but they were the first team to make it to four Super Bowls. They made four of the first 11, and then they dropped them all to the Chiefs in Super Bowl 4, the Dolphins in Super Bowl 8, Steelers in Super Bowl 9, and then Super Bowl 11 lost to the Raiders, and then they just haven't been back since. That's part of the reason that they have the fourth worst all-time winning percentage in the playoffs. Like I said, they've have the sixth most appearances. I think they've even made the playoffs more than the Packers in the Super Bowl era. And it's just crazy. One of 12 teams to never win the Super Bowl. And like I said, every team kind of has every generation of fans has some sort of defining heartbreak. The fans that grew up with the Purple People Eaters, you have the Super Bowl losses, like I said, but you also have the Hail Mary loss, and then 87. You got Darren Nelson. You got the Herschel Walker trade, which not only stung for the Vikings, but it also created a dynasty for the Cowboys. In the '98, even 2000, like the Vikings lost 41-0 to the Giants in the 2000 season, and that one's kind of forgotten a lot, just because the Vikings weren't really that close in that game. It's just crazy to me how much the Vikings have just kind of uh, consistently over the course of time just not been able to ever really figure it out and just kind of like luck into one of these. While all these other teams are kind of lapping them, like I said, the Packers have been like really, really good since Brett Favre took over. But like even they like had like a long stretch of uh, futility after their second Super Bowl win after the '67 season. Vince Lombardi left. The Packers only made the playoffs twice from the 1968 season to the 1992 season. The Vikings, meanwhile, they have their longest stretch of not making the playoffs is four seasons in the Super Bowl era. From what 86 it wasn't 86, but they like four seasons, yeah, 83 through the 86 season. That's their longest stretch of not making it to the postseason. In the early 2000s, from 2001 to 2007, Vikings only made it once in the 2004 season. So like they're not ever even like totally bottoming out like these other teams. So then you're not like getting a first overall pick or something like that. That could be like the biggest criticism. Think of like the 2011 season where you win like a meaningless game against the Washington Redskins on Christmas Eve. And then Washington ends up with the second overall pick, and they get RG3, which we can say what we want about RG3, but like the Vikings ended up with the third overall pick, traded down a spot on draft night, got Matt Khalil, stuff like that. That just it just never seems to really work out with each other for the Vikings. So yeah, throughout the course of history, the Vikings they're just obviously never good enough to win it all, but then they've never really been bad enough to like luck into just this like completely generational well, you know, not like the number one overall pick or something where you're just able to take advantage of all your draft picks. Because we're going to get into it in a second where they actually do get a lot of generational players, even despite that, which is just bonkers. So it leads you to wonder like will this ever end because not only have the Vikings had like all this team success, they have some of the best players in NFL history like at their respective positions and it's crazy. Franz Harkington, he retired after the 78 season, holding almost every major passing record in the NFL. Alan Page, he's one of two defenders who has won NFL MVP. He won it in 1971 as a defensive tackle and is widely regarded as one of the best defensive tackles of all time. Paul Krause, NFL's all-time leader in interceptions at safety. Randall McDaniel, possibly the best offensive guard in NFL history. Chris Carter, second receiver in NFL history to reach 1,000 receptions. Randy Moss, one of the best receivers of all time, maybe the best receiver of all time. If you think that he's better than Jerry Rice, by far the most talented of all time. Adrian Peterson, one of the best running backs of all time, 2,097 rushing yards in the 2012 season, dragging Christian Ponder in that Vikings offense to the playoffs. Now we've got Justin Jefferson. This isn't even counting John Randall or Jared Allen or anybody. Just like look through the history of the Vikings. They have some of the best players in the history of the league that go beyond just this. And despite all that, they can't figure it out. Like I said, the Herschel Walker trade that fuels the Cowboys dynasty. Sam Darnold. Sam Darnold can't figure it out in Week 18 of the 2024 season. Vikings end up with a fifth seed, and then he looks bad in the playoffs. The Vikings let him go via free agency. He wins a Super Bowl immediately. Brad Johnson wins a Super Bowl with the Buccaneers. Just guys like that. It just all makes it just that much more painful for the Vikings. Right now, we got Justin Jefferson, who could, like I said, he could be like the next great. Is he ever going to win a Super Bowl? Right now, he's wondering if he can even win a freaking playoff game. He hasn't won a playoff game in his NFL career just yet. So hopefully, we've got some other guys who end up being all-time greats. We got Harrison Smith. Love to see if he could get a Super Bowl if he were to come back this year. It's just all these guys, all these things, all these abnormalities that just work against the Vikings, and all together it creates this really perplexing team. It's like a very painful team to root for because they're never bad enough to just completely ignore, but they're never good enough to like pay off your rooting interest. You can't even like look back to the glory, like even the glory days. Like I said, you look back to the 70s. That's when everybody talks about Bud Grant, the Purple People Eaters, and even then they're choking in the playoffs and everything. It's just crazy how all this works out. And you just look across the NFL landscape, and there's all these inferior teams that have figured it out. That just the cards just align, the stars align for a season, and it's just never worked out that way for the Vikings. It just really makes it really, really difficult to be a fan of this team, but it does make it, it makes it entertaining. It's always entertaining. It's not always good, but it always gives us something worth cheering about. It always gives us just enough hope, just so that you're waiting for the other shoe to drop and for the Vikings just to take a sledgehammer to the side of your head right when your emotions are at its highest. Think like the Minneapolis Miracle. I was at that game. I was convinced we were going to the Super Bowl. A week later, we drive right down the field on the opening drive of the NFC Championship against the Eagles. Kyle Rudolph gets a touchdown wide open from Case Keenum. Vikings force a 3-and-out on the very next drive. I thought for sure the Vikings were going to the Super Bowl. And then Case Keenum throws a pick six. Momentum completely swings of that game, and it was basically over after that. Will it ever change? I hope it does. With Nolan Teasley at GM, I think that we have a head coach who can get this team over the hump with the right personnel. Brian Flores is one of the best defensive coordinators in the league. Hopefully, we're able to see this version of the Vikings with Kyler Murray in an improved running game. Help elevate the offense to match the defense in 2026. Can we make it work this year? Can we end the streak? I don't know. It's been 50 years since the Vikings were last in the Super Bowl. Let's see if they can not only make it back to the Super Bowl, but win the damn thing this year. I'm Cole Smith. This has been Vikings Latest. Vikings are the best team to never win the Super Bowl, and it isn't even close.